Get ahead of postage rate increases this year with Stamps.com. It's like your own personal post office. Sign up with promo code PROGRAM for a 4-week trial plus free postage and a free digital scale. No long-term commitments or contracts. That's Stamps.com, code PROGRAM.
Wow, so many terms, right? Well, we have just begun our risk management journey so far. Once we assess the risk, based on value, or impact, we need to address it as well, or else, the whole exercise is of no use. Risk addressing covers this part. So, to make myself clear here, once a risk is identified with its likelihood and impact, we need to address them. We have 4 options to address any risk. They are risk avoidance, risk transference, risk mitigation, and risk acceptance. Hello, welcome to the next episode of Get Certified Together program by TechnoCoff, your free online knowledge sharing community. Visit our website, www.technocoff.com, for more information. In this episode, we will be covering the next section of the CompTIA Security Plus certification exam. Finally, we have arrived on the last section of the CompTIA Security Plus exam. For Section 5 of the exam, Governance, Risk, and Compliance, I will cover various topics like regulation and frameworks, risk management, and organizational policies. For my regular listeners, I am in the middle of preparing a podcast series for the Certified Cloud Security Professionals (CCSP) exam. However, I myself am still to appear for the exam, hence I don't want to give knowledge when I myself is not sure if I am competent enough. So the podcast may be released around November, when I am planning to appear for the exam. Also, I will be planning to record it myself this time, instead of the AI voice you heard in all these episodes for the CompTIA exam. Let us start with the topic of risk management. For this topic, I want to take you guys back to Section 1 of the CompTIA certification course, where we read about risks and how it is related to threats and vulnerability. Basically, an attacker can use different attack vectors to take advantage of the vulnerability associated with the system, which is a threat to the system's security. This threat ultimately creates an element of risk for all users of that system. Any system can have multiple vulnerabilities. Each vulnerability has different levels of threats. They can be critical, medium, or low, based on the risk they create. Therefore, similar levels of planning are required for risks before declaring their impact. Another factor in determining the risk associated with a threat is by checking the source of risk. What I mean by the source is whether it is associated with internal, or external, or due to the use of legacy systems, etc. Let us understand a few essential terms associated with risk management now. First is risk assessment. Risk assessment helps in categorizing risks based on their likelihood of occurrence and impact on the system. This assessment is vital, as it helps security experts decide whether a risk is high, low, or medium. This type of risk assessment is termed the qualitative risk assessment. However, for better judgment, we can perform the data-oriented, quantitative risk assessment. For quantitative risk assessment, we can use the various factors and compute an actual cost associated with the risk. The very first basic factor for calculating quantitative risk assessment is single loss expectancy, or SLE. We can calculate SLE by multiplying asset value and exposure factor. What are asset value and exposure factors? Asset value is the cost of the asset in the current market. The exposure factor is the damage incurred to our assets in case of risk actually materializes. We can multiply both of them to estimate the actual loss to the company if the risk materializes one time in a year. So in 1 year, we calculated a single time loss to the company. But we cannot control the number of times an incident will occur, right? So, we introduce ARO, or annualized rate of occurrence, a simple count of the number of times a risk can occur in a year. Now, we have the value for loss due to single time occurrence, calculated by SLE, and the number of times an incident can occur calculated by ARO. Multiplying both will give us the actual total loss associated with risk. This total cost is called annualized loss expectancy, or ALE. I know, these are a lot of terms, but they can be asked in the exam, hence we cannot ignore them while preparing for the cert.
A few important mentions are MTTF, MTBF, and MTTR.
MTTF is the mean time to failure, that is, the average time before a non-repairable asset fails. MTBF is the mean time before failure, that is, the average time before a repairable asset fails. MTTR is the mean time to repair, that is the time taken to repair a repairable asset. Wow, so many terms, right? Well, we have just begun our risk management journey so far. Once we assess the risk, based on value, or impact, we need to address it as well, or else, the whole exercise is of no use. Risk addressing covers this part. So, to make myself clear here, once a risk is identified with its likelihood and impact, we need to address them. We have 4 options to address any risk. They are risk avoidance, risk transference, risk mitigation, and risk acceptance. Let us begin with risk avoidance. Risk avoidance implies a situation where identified risk cannot be fixed, hence, there needs to be an avoidance strategy in place to remove risk. One example of risk avoidance is migrating your data center because the current location is prone to any sort of natural disaster. Next is risk transference. Risk transference implies a situation where the impact of any identified risk is transferred from one organization to another. One example of risk transference is buying insurance for your hardware, or hiring managed service professionals with the liability of payment in case of failure. The third type is risk mitigation, which implies a situation where an organization actually designs and installs solutions to mitigate the risk instead of avoiding or transferring them. One example of risk mitigation is installing EDR solutions or buying DDoS solutions to mitigate risks arising from malware and security attacks. Last is risk acceptance. We reach to this type because not every risk can be avoided, transferred, or mitigated. Those risks are discussed thoroughly and accepted as it is. It means the organization doesn't plan or implement any solution to fix the risk and is ready to bear the loss in case a risk actually impacts the business. So, we have categorized the risks and created a strategy for them if they should be avoided, mitigated, transferred, or accepted. But we need to list them somewhere for future references, as well as record their present status. Thus, we use the risk registers. A risk register is a record of all the risks associated with any system, along with their causes, impact, likelihood, and score, based on different criteria. This helps in keeping a common record of all the risks, helping their evaluation, and planning their mitigation. The risk register can be populated using sources like audits, threat intelligence, open source intelligence, etc. Now that we have a fair idea of the risks associated with any systems, we have to look for the controls we can put in place. This is because, with each risk associated with the security of any system, we have to apply proper security controls. These controls are based on the risk profiles. The main categories are inherent risk, control risk, and residual risk. The inherent risk is the one that does not yet have any mitigation plan. The control risk is the one with the mitigation plan in place. The residual risk is the one that is left over after the mitigation plan is decided and is placed under the acceptance plan. For better security control, multi-layer security is recommended by info security professionals. This multi-layer security is called defense in depth. We have 4 different types of security control. They are preventive controls, detective controls, corrective controls, and deterrent controls. Preventive controls are designed to prevent any security-related issue from happening in the first place itself. An example is firewall, which stops unwanted IP addresses access right away, thus stopping malicious websites or traffic. The second type of control, detective control, can detect any potential security risk and call for further investigations. An example is IDS, or an intrusion detection system, as it detects the presence of any unwanted activity in the end system, but only when it is already committed. The third type is corrective control. Corrective controls work more towards the recovery of the system once an issue has already happened. An example is the recovery of any system to RPO or recovery point of objective from the backup. The last is deterrent control. Deterrent controls are responsible for deterring, loosely can be termed as a scare, any attacker from trying an attack. For example, putting a barbed fence across buildings. Wow, so many terms, right? Well, we have just begun our risk management journey so far. Once we assess the risk, based on value, or impact, we need to address it as well, or else, the whole exercise is of no use. Risk addressing covers this part. So, to make myself clear here, once a risk is identified with its likelihood and impact, we need to address them. We have 4 options to address any risk. They are risk avoidance, risk transference, risk mitigation, and risk acceptance.